You're listening to the Vint Wine Podcast, where you'll hear interviews and stories from around the wine world. From writers and critics to winemakers and sommeliers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping wine culture. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Vint Wine Podcast. I am your host, Billy Galanko, and we have a very special episode for you this week. A fantastic interview with a guest I've been working a long time to have on, Chris Cottrell from Bedrock, one of my favorite wine producers. And we have some big news. Instead of our regular news, we actually have Brady, the longtime co-host of the Vint Wine Podcast. This is his last ever episode with the Vint Wine Podcast. So moving forward, it will just be me as your solo host for the podcast. And we will also have a couple other really exciting developments in the coming months. So stay tuned. But for now, Brady, welcome to your own podcast. How does it feel?
Yeah, thanks, Billy. It feels good to be welcomed to the thing that actually, this was the first thing that I started working on was the podcast back when in the fall of 21, pretty new, working at Vint. And I didn't know what to do. And so I saw that we had a podcast, and 200 episodes later, here we are. And I'm excited with where you're going to take it in the future.
Yeah, it's actually fitting. I think this is exactly our 200th episode.
Our first episodes back when we were predominantly a wine investment firm was about business activities, which was cool at the time. Not so cool now that we have world-class producers on and winemakers and such. So like the one we have today. But yeah, sad to be exiting my radio career. Excited with where you're going to take it in the future. So it was fun.
Yeah, we'll definitely miss you, but we'll have you back on here and there to check in on life and see what you've been drinking. But yeah, I think this is a really fitting episode for you to end on too.
Yeah, Bedrock is like one of those talked about in the wine industry and among wine people brands, and probably seen by consumers. Wines are pretty accessible in most wine shops around the country, but not one that gets nearly enough recognition in the mainstream, in my opinion. And so a really cool producer to end on. And Chris is amazing, super easy to talk to, and some of the most fascinating vineyard sites in California, if not the entire US, just in terms of the age of their vines and the range of the types of varieties that they work with and the sites that they work with. Really cool.
Yep, I totally agree. Bedrock is fantastic. This has been really great to have Chris on. So Chris, a little bit more background on Chris. He gives us a lot of insight into how Bedrock was formed and how he first met Morgan Twain-Peterson, his business partner. They met in New York. That's a really fascinating story while he was still working in wine. And then eventually, as their friendship grew and blossomed, he ended up moving over to California. And it's really cool to hear how the company grew. We really get some insight into the vineyards that they acquired over the years, how special certain ones are, the different bottlings they have, and how Under the Wire, their sparkling project, actually was one of their first projects. I wasn't aware of that. So it was really fascinating and really cool to get a deep dive into one of my favorite wine brands. So this was a fantastic interview, and a great way for Brady to right off into the sunset. I think you came on talking about Paso Robles wines, and now you've upgraded to talking about all of California.
We'll leave it at that.
Oh, all right. Well, before we get to our interview, thanks again, Brady, for all of your time on the podcast. And without further ado, here is our interview with Chris Cottrell from Bedrock. Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know this has been a long time coming. I've been excited to have you guys on at some point. When I first moved to California nearly 7 years ago, I ended up working at a local winery, and my boss here was like, of all the California wines you need to know, he was a member at Bedrock, and he's like, you need to know Bedrock, and you need to go visit them. So
that's amazing. Well, yeah, glad to hear that. That's been a big part of our success is people telling other people about us. So that's cool.
Well, and the funny part was that this guy just owned a wine company and made his own wines, and he was still like, the one to know are these guys. So
that's the highest form of compliment you can get.
Yeah. Could you give everybody a little bit of background on you and your partner, and then basically we can dive into what Bedrock is and all the wines?
Yeah, I came to wine when I was 18, freshman in college in Manhattan, and needed a college job. And a Craigslist ad led me to this wine store on the Upper East Side, how to stock shelves and deliver wine on hand trucks around the neighborhood. And I got really lucky because it's not like, it wasn't a liquor store. It was like a small, artisanal, very thoughtfully curated neighborhood wine store. And I also got lucky because the manager of that store had a very European sense of the drinking age. So I got to taste. And pretty quickly, within the first week, Phil poured me 2 white wines and said, these are the same grape from 2 different places. And I tasted both, and they're completely different. And here's that one's from California, that one's from Chablis. They're both Chardonnay. And pretty quickly, I was like, oh, I really am interested in this and want to learn more about it. Also partly motivated by that. If I learned more about wine, I would maybe not have to deliver wine 10 blocks away in the snow. I also got lucky both there and at Crush, in that I was surrounded by really good mentors and people that wanted to share wine and teach me about wine. And one of those people was Morgan Twain-Peterson, now my business partner, who I met while he was in grad school working at Pet Wines, the first wine store I worked. And first we just became friends, but if anyone knows Morgan, he's an incredibly smart, passionate, fun guy to be around. From a friendship side, we became good friends, but then also from a learning about wine side, Morgan, and then ultimately other people I worked with in the future, really gave me a lot of knowledge and a lot of wine, and it clicked. And then I ended up at this wine store when I was 19, called Crush, which had just opened, which was a much bigger, higher end, but still nerdy, like higher end collector wine, but still nerdy. And yeah, we'll continue to learn there from another incredibly small, talented, smart group of people who were pretty on the cutting edge of wine and how to sell wine, and continue to get inspired there. And thought I was going to go to law school, but then met a lot of lawyers and fell in love with a lot of wines. And at 21, I decided to go full time there as a fine wine specialist. And that's where my adult life career started. And ultimately in 2011, I went and worked harvest with Morgan after he started Bedrock in 2007. And first harvest, Morgan took me to my first vineyards. And then our friendship continued to grow, and we became really, really close friends over the years. In 2011, we decided to start a project called Under the Wire, which is our single vineyard sparkling wine project we have. And then in 2012, Morgan was growing and was a one-man show, and we decided to become business partners. And I moved out to California to build a winery and make wine with my best friend.
So you had that Chablis, but your travels, did they take you to Burgundy at any point?
I did get to go to Burgundy, and my mind was blown.
Yeah,
it was an incredible experience, because I had been, like all of us, I think, but if you're really geeking out on wine, you study Burgundy pretty deeply, and the wines are pretty good too. But getting to go there, and the people I went to Burgundy with were some people I worked with, but then also Aldo San and Robert Bohr kind of leading the group. And Robert in particular was really good about, even though it was muddy in January, taking me to Chambertin and like being able to see like Clos Saint Jacques and or being in Lucenay and seeing Amalus and these just little subtle differences of how people were pruning and mid-slope versus lower slope. So yeah, the Burgundy trip was pretty special. I got lucky with that one.
And when you were 19, 20, 21, did you have a sense of what in the wine world, how much legacy and history and those kinds of things meant to wine growers in California? Because now I'm looking at like the Bedrock vineyards, over 150 years of history.
Yeah.
Right. Does that sort of stand out as a consideration for you when you were jumping into those projects?
Oh, and my whole education up to coming out to California, Morgan was going to be a history professor when I met him. So he had a real love of history, and I did too. And the first vineyard I ever went to was I came out to California when I was 19 or 20 to visit, hang out with Morgan, and his dad had just bought the Bedrock vineyard, our home vineyard. And there's vines out there planted in 1888. Like you said, there's been grapes grown on that plot of land for over 150 years. It has a deep history that Morgan has done a lot of research on. And so we really have a pretty incredible timeline of who farmed it, who owned it. And when you're walking around an Old Vine vineyard with someone like Morgan, when you're hearing this long history and you're looking at something that's been growing and producing wine, which I think is a very special product because of its connection to the land as much as the person, when you look at that vine and you see pruning decisions and pruning cuts in that vine, that people have been touching that vine and farming that vine for 130 years. You can't help but feel, or at least I can't, feel something deep inside. So yeah, the history element and the preservation element of these old vine vineyards is obviously one of the core things.
It's also the main antidote to like the corporatized California wine of the last maybe 3.5 decades, right? Super accelerated from hippies growing wine to the modern facilities just plopped down on a flat piece of land.
I don't know about hippies. Yeah, Morgan's dad was definitely a hippie, but the guy who planted Bedrock Vineyard and even the guy who farmed it before us, they were not hippies at all. But I think truthfully in California, there's been pretty consistent. There's obviously been the huge mass production corporate wineries that are behemoths, but California pretty much before Prohibition and coming up into the 60s and 70s and 80s we've always had a pretty strong also group of small, thoughtful, trying to make the best wines in the world contingent as well. So I think California does have this really distinct duality of the massive wineries, but then also a real treasure trove of incredibly small, thoughtful farmers and producers.
Yeah, I think, and we've gone on this podcast a fair bit about, because I love history, especially now living in California. I've tried to absorb it, and we're actually going to my wife's parents in San Jose next week, and she asked me what I wanted to do, and I'm like, my goal for the weekend is to go up to Livermore because I've always wanted to see where the Wente vineyards were. And she's like,
tons of vineyards out there.
Mm-hmm. She's like, why? And I was like, well, that's where the first Chardonnay, and like this clone is now propagated everywhere. And she's, I don't think I want to go now. And I was like, all right.
When you take a trip, it's important not to take, when you're in the wine business, take only wine focused trips. So I do take trips, but I'm always giving myself at least one visit somewhere that I really want to see. So one is very reasonable. You could be telling her you want to go to 10 vineyards in 2 days.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like 4 days at my in-laws versus one little vineyard visit, it balances out well.
Total fair trade-off.
So I wanted to ask, and you touched on something that I've recently gotten more discovered over the past year, looking at vines and understanding pruning more, is they really do show their history on their face as they go. How have you guys managed vineyards? I guess there are certain ones you've taken care of longer or maybe were better maintained, and then there are other ones that were maybe neglected for a long time. How does that impact the fruit that comes out and your approach to them?
It's a good question. I think it's a really good question here. I have to cut out a break here. I think when it comes to how we look at old vines specifically and how we farm them, like you said, it's also what condition is this vineyard in? Has it been farmed consistently? What kind of treatments were done in the vineyard? Was it very conventionally farmed, or was it pretty gently farmed when it comes to the inputs you can put in the vineyard? What's the irrigation or lack of irrigation like? How has it been pruned? That's a big one, right? There are certain vineyards that have been pruned by the same family for 100 years. They have perfect Goblet vines, right? You don't need to change the pruning strategy. You just need to keep adding your cuts to what they've already built structurally. Whereas other vineyards, it's been 5 different farmers over 100 years. So there's wacky pruning decisions that happen through decades. And sometimes you have to go in there with a chainsaw and back off part of the vine to bring the vine into balance. And the other thing with old vines is if you have 130-year-old vine, a vineyard, that vineyard has been farmed consistently. So this really always looking at a soil first farming of how do we create the healthiest living soil that will allow an ancient vine to continue to prosper and hopefully even get better and healthier and ultimately make wines or live longer than Morgan and I. So there's the structural elements and practices that we try to pretty much immediately cut out if they're there. But then also looking at what the particular context of that vineyard is, with the ultimate goal of having incredibly healthy soil, incredibly balanced vines that ultimately, when you do that, produce special wine. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's it.
Yeah, no, it does. And it makes me think of, I think it was a quote from Morgan. It might have been somebody else. And it was in regard to old vines always yielding less overall and then consistently going down. And I think it was him mentioning, well, if the soil is healthy and you're treating it the right way, they can actually continue to prosper, if not grow in some yield in some time.
Oh, we've seen massive growth in yield with some of our farming practices, whether it's at Bedrock Vineyard, which was farmed very conventionally with the previous owners, or other vineyards where, they're producing half a ton an acre, which is not economically sustainable, to going and producing 2.5 tons the acre. You're never going to get an old vine, no matter how healthy your soil is. You're never going to be able to get an old vine to produce 10 tons the acre, but no quality wine really comes from great vineyards that are cropped that high. So I think old vines will always produce less, but I think it is something of a misconception that they automatically produce way less production than your average younger vine vineyard. You can get it to an economically sustainable level of production, which is always exciting too. Seeing over 10 years, this vineyard that was on the verge of death suddenly transforms a lot of times slowly over time. And you just see the health and the vibrancy of the vines and the things that are growing there. And it's really inspiring. And again, produces better wine, which is the ultimate goal.
When you guys have a lot to work with too, I'm looking at the little map on your site, which is nice because I'm over here on the East Coast. And so as much as we talk about California wine and I know parts of it, putting all the geography together is challenging. Looks like from your furthest vineyards up in the north in Mendocino County, all the way down to, what is it, near Monterey, and then out to east of Sacramento, covering a lot of ground in terms of vineyard sites, hundreds of miles between a lot of these sites. What kind of optionality does that give you in terms of the fruit that you're getting from those places? And is that sort of how you think about when you expand, just like that optionality with blending and other things down the line, or what's the thinking?
Actually, I realized that I don't know if we have a Santa Barbara vineyard that we work with on that map as well, because we even go further south than
okay.
Because we're crazy.
It's not on here right now, but there you go.
A lot of miles on the truck. I think it starts with Morgan and I are pretty, and a small team is pretty willing to put miles on the truck. And if we hear about a vineyard in Santa Barbara or San Benito County, where it's pretty far away from home base, but it's an exciting vineyard, we're going to go at least look at it. And if it's something that really gets us going, we're not going to have the logistical challenges of being a 4-hour drive away, get in the way of that. But then also, and most of the vineyards that we work with, the vast majority are in Sonoma. That's home base. That's where the concentration is. But when it comes to blending, particularly for like Old Vine Zin, which is arguably our most important, and certainly the wine that most people see out in the world and have a chance to taste, having a diversity of terroirs and places and styles of wine that these unique vineyards, old vine vineyards, make, allows us to make consistently on that side a really delicious wine every year, because we can lean into, is this a better Contra Costa year for what we're trying to do? Do we need some more structure from Sonoma Valley? Do we want aromatics from Amador County? So it really allows us to do, like you're saying, sculpt a wine like that is a blend of many vineyards. But then also, just from an intellectual standpoint, being able to taste, particularly from old vines vineyards, these Zin-based old vine wine from Russian River Valley versus Upper Sonoma Valley versus Lower Sonoma Valley versus Contra Costa versus Lodi, like traveling the state via these old vine vineyards and wines is a really unique and cool experience that I think just gets us going.
It seems like nearly two dozen sites, or am I way off on that? Something.
I don't know the number.
Well, the question was going to be though, I guess over time.
No, I mean, I think it's somewhere around that, like 25 to,
sure.
I think probably at our peak 30. Definitely, we're probably 30, actually, over 30 now. We make, I don't know, 45 different wines between Under the Wire and Bedrock. So there's a lot.
Well, so when you go out and you hear about a new site and you go and explore it and you guys start farming it, maybe you're farming it for a while. I'm sure you get better over time at understanding what you're looking for.
Of course. Yeah.
And so are you always trimming the portfolio up? It's, hey, like this site just over 5 years now just hasn't turned out. It's great, but it's just not where we want to keep spending our time and kind of keep trimming the portfolio upwards to more quality. Is that how it works for you? Or how do you look at acquisition and like new farming opportunities?
I think we've been for a while now in a refinement stage of our winery. We did pretty big growth and acquisition of vineyards, both buying and leasing or just buying fruit through probably 2016, 2017, 2018. And now it's okay. We're not looking to grow past our production level now. We're just trying to get better at picking the vineyards that we really love to work with and the wines that they make. So you're constantly looking at what your focus is and what vineyards you're working with and how it's going. There is something to be said for what's selling and what's getting people excited. You have to consider that as a business. If we really, really love something, we'll fight darn hard, even if the market isn't quite responding to it. And then I'd say now, in this sort of refinement period, there is a more shifting focus to continuing to make more wines from vines that we grow ourselves, whether it's vineyards that we own or vineyards where we lease, where we don't pay the property taxes, but the vineyard itself operates like is our operation, our tractors, our directives. So there is a shift of focus a little bit to buying less fruit and making more wine from grapes that we grow. With that said, we'll never not buy fruit from growers that we love. It gives us that diversity. We love working with great growers that sell us grapes and the conversations we have. And I think it's always going to be important for us to not just have fruit from vineyards that we grow, but also be a part of the community of other people growing, because it's cool and interesting, and you learn a lot from hanging out in vineyards with smart people who grow grapes too.
Is your target customer asking for more estate-owned and managed, or is it more of just background economics that drive maybe a shift there?
No, I think the biggest things that our customers, whether they're industry or just consumers, is how are the grapes farmed. More and more, it seems like every year, more and more people are asking about farming practices, more than, is this limestone or granite soils, which I think was really important, talked about a lot when I was coming up originally in the wine business. But now more and more you hear people asking about what is regenerative farming. I've heard this term, are you farming organically? And I think whether it's us that are growing the grapes or other people, I think the farming is the most important thing to the people out. Well, wine also needs to be delicious. Let's be honest about that too. So our consumers care about, is this wine delicious? Does it represent place? But definitely the farming question is the biggest thing that comes up, I would say.
Nice. That gives me hope for everybody. I'm glad that's being talked about more.
It's wild. It's so cool to see, particularly with young wine buyers and young consumers, the real attention they're wanting to have conversations, not just about winemaking, but how things are grown, is super inspiring right now.
Nice. I maybe that comes from, I know I lived in New York for a while, I live here, and a lot of friends, here, LA. A lot of my friends just have such a hard time growing any house plants. So I think there's also, along with climate change, a growing appreciation for keeping things alive. So I wanted to talk about now, we've talked about the vineyards, talk about the wines a little bit. Can you give us a little overview of the portfolio, including the under the wire? I actually didn't realize that was made from Zinfandel. I've had it many times, and maybe you've changed the blend, but that's what I read. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then single vineyard versus the blends. I think some people might have seen the Old Vine in Trader Joe's and around, or at least Whole Foods too, which is really cool. So give us a rundown.
I'm not sure we've ever been in Trader Joe's.
Maybe not Trader Joe's. Sorry, I'm getting you mixed up with Ridge. Sorry,
But that's a fair comp. They're the OGs of preserving and saving Old Vine vineyards
in there, but it's definitely Whole Foods at least.
Yeah, definitely in some markets Whole Foods. I mean, I encourage people to try. Our wines are mostly sold in independent retail, and obviously I came up in that. So I do encourage all your listeners out there to find your independent retail shop nearby, because they will always give you the best customer experience and have the best wine.
Well, the good news, the main thing I was getting at there is when my boss first told me about Bedrock, it was delicious, but harder to find. And now over the years, it's become easier and easier. And that's been really happy for me to see.
Yeah. And so going to your original question without the sidebar, we make a really wide diversity of wines and styles of wines, and from places, as we talked about. So we have sparkling wines, we have white wines, we have a big plethora of red wines. We make dessert wine. We make over 40 wines a year. So the Bedrock portfolio has 6 core wines that, like you were saying, you will find at maybe a Whole Foods or see by the glass on a restaurant list. And that is our Old Vine Zin, which is our bread and butter. It is the most important wine we make for saving these old vine vineyards. It gives us a real, what would I say, scale that we can have where we can take over farming an old vine vineyard, be able to make 150 cases of a single vineyard from that wine, or 100 cases, and then use the rest of the fruit for Old Vine Zin. So from a preservationist standpoint, it's an incredibly important wine. We also feel that Zinfandel is very misunderstood. And when you farm it right, when you pick it at not insane sugar levels, when you make it in a thoughtful way, Zinfandel can be an incredibly pretty wine. It has higher acid than people think. It can really be charming, but also serious. And I'm really proud of the fact that Old Vine Zin, even people that don't like Zin, oftentimes are like, wow, this is delicious. And I never thought I would like a Zin. And then also on the other side, the people that love Zin love our Zin. So that's definitely one of the core wines. And then the other wines you see out in the world mostly is Ode to Lulu Rosé, which is our Bandol-inspired rosé, Lupe Road, our Sauvignon Blanc, actually barrel ferment, so it's a little different there. California Syrah, our Sonoma County Cabernet. And those are the core value wines that we make. And then Bedrock Vineyard and Evangelo Vineyard heritage wines. So Bedrock Heritage Wine and Evangelo Heritage Wine from the 2 vineyards, 2 of the 3 vineyards we own. Those are the flagship, if you will, but also the 2 largest production single vineyard wines that if I were going to pour a wine for someone who really wanted to nerd out about the terroir of California old vine vineyards, those 2 would be side by side. And then after that, we make, under the wire, we make 6 different sparkling wines every year. Some of them, they're all single vineyard, single varietal. So we make Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, Pinot Noir, and Bedrock Zin. So searching for terroir via bubbles. And then, the other ones we make at Bedrock go from Old Vine Gewürztraminer to Old Vine Riesling to single vineyard Sauvignon Blancs to Old Vine White Field Blends to a lot of different Old Vine heritage wines and single vineyard Zinfandels. And we can get into what a heritage wine is. And then Cabernet, Syrah, Barbera. Basically what I'm saying is, if you love wine, I will bet my life on it that you can come to me, tell me what you like, and I'll find a few wines in our lineup that you will love. I love our diversity of not just places, but styles of wine that we make. And that's the cool thing about these old heritage vineyards is some of them are big, powerful, structured, need lots of age and time, and other ones are more delicate and pretty. A lot of the spreadsheet is pretty serious.
Well, for our listeners, when they hear Old Vine, what should come to mind? What should they expect from that wine? Maybe just like high level, what you think that phrase should call to mind, and then what you mean by heritage vineyards. Put some color around that.
Yeah. So when it comes to like our Old Vine Zin, it means that it's from legit old vines, which Morgan's a founding member of the Historic Vineyard Society, which we basically have to set a line, and the line was set at 50 years. So we consider an old vine over 50 years old, whether it's the difference between a 49-year-old vine and a 51-year-old vine. It's semantics, but you have to draw the line somewhere. So Old Vine Zin, average vine age in that wine is over 80 years old. So it's legit old vines and mostly from fruit we grow. And stylistically, we want California sunshine in it, but we also want brightness and freshness. Always how we're thinking about any of our wines is we want them to be distinctly Californian, which means they do have sunshine, but also we don't want the alcohols to get out of control. We want it to have acid. We want it to be a food wine. We want to we want to have you want a second glass of it. And then that applies to all the wines. And then heritage wines in particular, this is always the hardest thing to explain to people, I think, in the fact that they see red blend on it and they think it's just like another red blend where you're making all the grapes and vineyards separately and then blending before bottle. But what defines a heritage wine in our winery, and I think we make, I don't know, 8 different heritage, 10 different heritage wines now, is that it's a single vineyard. It's an old vine vineyard. And most of our heritage wines are really like vines planted in the 19th century or early 20th century. So single vineyard, old vine vineyard, where it's a field blend. So I'm sure most of your listeners know what a field blend is, but it's a vineyard that has all these different grapes planted together, not necessarily in any particular order. And so you have all these different varieties and you pick them together and co-ferment them. So the blend is built out in the field rather than later. And what we love about making these heritage wines, besides the old vines that we think are incredibly cool and historically important, but there's nowhere else in the world that has these field blends, right? Like, we love making Syrah, but you have to look to the Northern Rhone when it comes to making Syrah. They've been doing it for 1,000 years. But these old vine field blends that are in California that are a melting pot, based usually around Zinfandel, but we'll have Mourvedre in them. We'll have Carignan in them. We'll have Mondeuse in them. We'll have Trousseau Noir in them. There's nowhere else in the world that makes these wines. It's the only wines in California, I feel, that are truly uniquely California, where we're not looking to Europe for inspiration. We get to be our own reference point and not only be inspired by the viticultural pioneers of California, literally use the vines that they plant. So yeah, heritage wines, and then Cabernet, we want them to have structure, but still have a little pyrazine, still have a little bit of spice and not be over oaked or overripe. Syrah, like I said, we're definitely looking to the Northern Rhone, but all of them we want to be distinctly Californian and not try and make them something that they're not, but also always trying to preserve acid and freshness.
With that, have you guys seen that you need to widely vary the winemaking approach based like vineyard by vineyard, or is it like a blanket style that you apply?
No, it's definitely tailor fit to the vineyard. There's some core philosophies that we have in making wine. A lot of people would call it low intervention, but like, for instance, native yeast fermentation. It's a big part of what we do. But I would say number one is we're very detailed, whether it's on the farming side with Morgan, Jake, and Casey, or in the winery with Bodie, Katie, and Allie. There's a lot of thought that goes into each lot, a lot of detail that's talked about, a lot of looking back on what has that wine been before with what we did, and is there things we want to adjust? Evangelo, we think about aging that wine very differently than we think about how we age Bedrock when it comes to vessels and sometimes even time before bottling. So there's a lot of, we're always playing around, like trying new things. We're never done learning, certainly in the vineyard, and we're never done learning in the winery. So it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach to winemaking. There's some core beliefs there, but then also not being dogmatic. I think Morgan and I are really turned off by dogmatic thinking. I think it's important not to get too caught up in this set in stone idea of what will work for a vineyard. Sometimes you have to adjust how you think about a vineyard, how you farm that vineyard, or how you make that wine.
Yeah, and I think that's the point I was going for there, is when people hear low intervention, they think you really just don't do anything or you don't like really care. And it's no, there's actually more attention given. So
110%. I think that's why I almost like cringed a little when I said that term, because yeah, it has this, people have this idea of, oh, we pick the grapes, we put them on a truck, we put them in a container, and we never look at them again until they're in bottle. But this idea, and it's no, if you actually want to be having a light hand on the fruit you worked so hard to grow and make the best thing, like even if you aren't using a lot of tools in the toolbox, you have to be incredibly detailed and thoughtful and clean in the winery.
What are a few things maybe of those tweaks? Or yeah, maybe let's start in the vineyard. What are a few things that maybe you guys have adjusted in recent years, old vines are more resilient to climate change and drought and changing weather, but maybe there's a few things that you guys have found that have been like very successful or helpful in the past 3 to 5 years.
I think the overall biggest thing has been our conversion to regenerative organic farming at Bedrock Vineyard. And we now, as of 4 weeks ago, we're now certified regenerative organic by the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and which is a very proud moment because I only think there's 24 or 25 vineyards in the world that are certified. And the philosophy of regenerative organic is just incredibly, it's a really well thought out way of farming. And frankly, it started more in food ag more than in vineyard agriculture, say biodynamics, but it has 6 core principles, some of which involve no-till soil, animal integration in your vineyards or your farm, but then also context, which is one of the things I really like that I think Morgan always had in our core, going what we were talking about before with dogma. There's a context principle with regenerative organic where it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to farming, right? You have to understand the context of your farm, your ranch. And that doesn't just include what soil you have, the organic matter in your soil, but it also includes things like people. One of the things with Regenerative Organic Alliance to get certified is that you have to show that the people farming your vineyard are making a living wage and being treated well. And I love that. I love that part of the certification. But from like a soil health perspective and how we think about making the healthiest living soil and not just growing our vines in dirt, regenerative organic and the things we've learned over the last 7 years going through that process is definitely one of the core things that where we're growing and developing and applying the things that we learned at Bedrock Vineyard to other vineyards that we farm.
What would you say are kind of some of the key differences maybe between like just biodynamics and regenerative? And also, I don't know if it's just the word regenerative is more approachable, at least to English speaking people, but I feel like people, when you say that, know more of what it means, even if they know nothing about wine, than biodynamics.
It's funny. Number one, though, biodynamics is a kick-ass name. Like, it sounds so cool. Biodynamics. But yeah, I think it's amazing to me how in the last year, the people talking about regenerative farming on the industry side and on the consumer side and throwing around the word regenerative, similar to here, a lot of it with sustainable. And my one fear is that it's going to become a term that is just thrown around without really understanding the context and what it should be and look like. But from organic, biodynamics, and regenerative, it's all built on similar core beliefs of wanting to farm in a very healthy way that makes the crop you're growing as healthy and successful as it can be as a plant. Biodynamics has a different system. I think between the two, the similarities are the people that are farming biodynamically or truly farming regeneratively, like really care, right? And really want to produce something that is special and has a positive impact on the community around that farm or vineyard. One of the biggest differences, I would say, is tillage between biodynamics and regenerative, which we can dive down a deep rabbit hole of why we are converting to no-till in our vineyards. But I think that's probably the biggest difference. And also, that not one size fits all. Biodynamic has some pretty rigorous things you have to do and how you time them. Whereas regenerative, you have a lot more flex to do what you need to do at a specific moment in time.
You guys said that you have maybe 45 different wines that you're making. And I don't know if for you guys or for you personally, if those heritage wines are the ones that maybe stand out to you as the most exciting to talk about, or if I'm sure you have babies all over the place that that you'd like to bring up, but maybe focusing in on 5 of those different labels and maybe some of the aspects of them that really make the Bedrock portfolio what it is.
Yeah. No, lots of children, but no, Bedrock heritage wine from Bedrock Vineyard. So it's a little confusing. We make Bedrock heritage wine, which is from Bedrock Vineyard. So the winery is named after the first vineyard.
I got it. Yeah.
That we made wine from. So Bedrock Vineyard heritage wine. It's a single vineyard wine from the vineyard the first vineyard I ever walked. And, the characteristics of Bedrock heritage is it's a field blend. Morgan has mapped the vineyard, I think, 6 times, and there's about 16,000 vines out there. And we've identified at this point 29 different varieties in the field blend. So it is an incredibly diverse field blend from vines planted in 1888. Just for context, 2% of the country had electricity when these vines first went in the ground. So it's a really diverse field blend, but it's based around 3 classic old vine field blend vines in California: Zinfandel, Carignan, and Mourvedre. But then we have Trousseau Noir out there. We have Tempranillo. We have Alicante Boucher. We have Grand Noir. We have Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot. There's mission vines out there. So it's a really diverse vineyard varietally in Sonoma Valley, up on this bench of basalt. And it always makes a wine that has really beautiful perfume, but also structure and some weight to it that ages for, we're only in year, 18 of our winery, but I think in the best vintages, Bedrock can age for 25 years plus. So that's sort of the OG of our lineup. And then Evangelo Vineyard, another vineyard that we own, 1890s vines, also based around Zinfandel, Mourvedre, Carignan, smaller field blend. There's 4 other varieties out there. But that vineyard's out in Contra Costa County. So it's literally in a city of 100,000 people. It's surrounded by suburban sprawl and a power plant. Used to all be vines out there, but then the city grew as California grew. So Evangelo's 1890s own rooted vines on what looks like it's like beach sand out there. So just completely different soils. Both Bedrock and Evangelo are windy, but Evangelo is particularly windy. Evangelo, even though it's 1890s vines, similar main 3 grapes as Bedrock Heritage, Evangelo with the wind and the sand produces this much more, I don't want to say delicate because the wine has density, but it's like it just has this freshness to it. The tannins are really fine. We only do it in Foudre to really be low impact on it, like old school Chateauneuf de Pape or old school Bandol as Bedrock, a little more smaller format because it does have that structure. And I think one of the coolest things about Evangelo that I've experienced was this Old Vine Zinfandel field blend wine planted in kind of an industrial suburban sprawl area, was poured by the glass with the tasting menu at Le Bernardin with a fish course. And I don't think people think about a Zinfandel based wine being poured with a fish course. Bedrock and Evangelo, those are obviously 2 vineyards I love. We own a vineyard in Lodi called Katusha's that we saved from being ripped up, which again, I think really bends people's mind of how pretty and fresh and vibrant that wine is. And it comes from Lodi 1915 plantings. Under the wire on the sparkling side, Rousseau in Chalon is an incredible vineyard, vines planted in 1980 at 1,800 feet on limestone and granite. That just makes an incredibly unique California single vineyard sparkling wine. Or you go up to Alder Springs, which is always a fun comparison between the 2 sparklingers. Alder, literally like 7 hours north of Rousseau. Different soils, high elevation though, cold place. That makes, again, a very uniquely California wine. And it's both those places are just like staggeringly beautiful to be in. Yeah, Old Hill Ranch in Sonoma Valley. It's only about 1.5 miles north of Bedrock. Vines planted in the 1880s, so similar time planted as Bedrock Vineyard. Another wild field blend of 35 varieties. The 2 major grapes there being Zinfandel and Grenache. So different soils, even though it's only 1.5 miles north and still based around Zinfandel, makes a completely different wine. And the person who owns it, the people who own it, Lizanne and Will, are just also wonderful friends and people. And it's another beautiful place. It's the place I got married. So I think that people can understand why that vineyard's special to me. But yeah, I can keep going on. Oakville Farmhouse, the oldest vines in Oakville, planted in the 30s next to Toquelin that we farm. We just started making Dietert Cabernet Franc from, you can't call it Toquelin, but originally what was called Toquelin, from vines planted in 1979. It's Nervo Ranch. This is one that's, I think, a little underappreciated in our lineup. It's 1896 vines near Geyserville on this really steep slope. And it has Zinfandel, Negrette, Trousseau Noir, and one of these wines that just really speaks of place. There's no wine in the world that I've tasted that tastes like Nervo. And then on the other side of the hill, we have Taldeschi, excuse me, with that the vineyard Morgan's dad started working with in the early 1980s. So there's been like this family legacy and history of working with these vines planted between 1900 and 1940.
Those all sound so great. I think next time I'm up there, I'm just going to ask you guys for a couple addresses and do a lap and just go drive around in a circle and look at them.
hop in the car with us. We can do a little tour.
I would love to. My wife, I tell her that old vines are like the most beautiful things in the world. She thinks they're like the ugliest things in the world. So it's just like an interesting balance.
I think if we catch the right day with the cover crops blooming or the sheep being out there grazing.
She would go for the sheep. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll get her out there when it's all green and the sheep are grazing and there's adorable sheep babies and going in between these old bonsai looking vines. I think we can get her to come over to our side.
I think the other part is it's like in the winter, like maybe even right after they're pruned, is like when I like to see them the most because you really see like the full body, where it's like she does like the leaves and everything else.
That's why you need the diverse array of cover crops, right? Because the vines are this like starkly dormant thing, and then there's all this life growing around it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing I wanted to mention, we've talked a little bit earlier about how some of your wines are decently widely distributed, but then also if people do want to come and taste and maybe taste some of these more harder to find wines, you guys have that awesome tasting room in Sonoma. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what people can do?
Yeah, we have a little small house just off the Sonoma Plaza that was built in 1848. It's called the General Joseph Lee Hooker House. And so General Joseph Lee Hooker of Civil War fame, he was the original planter with William Tecumseh Sherman of Bedrock Vineyard in 1854. So we have this connection to this house via our vineyard. And yeah, it's like a little bit of a museum and then a little bit of a tasting room. So you can drink some of the oldest vine wines in the world in this incredibly historic old house. And again, it's kind of like our winemaking. We take it very seriously and really want to give people a great experience, but we're not like too precious about it or pretentious about it. And also with our lineup, like you'll go there and you can taste sparkling wine, you can taste a Bordeaux Blanc style wine, Cabernet Syrah. There's a lot of diversity of what we pour there and what you can taste there, library wines. And Idoia and Aista, who run it, are just wonderful people to be around. So it's a great place.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect description. When I was there, it's like you guys have really nice stemware and the wines are amazing, but also it's laid back and you can sit on the outside on the patio and it's really relaxing.
Exactly. If you want to nerd out and dive deep, we're happy to do that. But if you just want to hang out with some friends and drink some good wine, out of Zaltos, you can do that too.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, the Sonoma. Well, my wife and I got married in Sonoma, just up the road from the tasting room. So that place in particular is special to me. And everybody who came, I was like, you have to go to Bedrock, and they're like, we want to go out into the vineyard. I'm like, you have to just go to this house.
That's truly, I said it maybe earlier, but that's truly been the biggest part of our success is critics have helped, press, all that stuff, our distributors getting out in the world. But the biggest part of our success has been people like you going out there and telling their friends, sharing the wines with their neighbors to come check us out or try our wines. So it means a lot.
Yeah, it was great. A lot of my friends, I grew up on the East Coast. A lot of these people thought they knew wine or knew California wine, and then they got to taste at Bedrock and had their minds open. Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris, so much for the time, and we appreciate you having you on. We'll have to have you back on again in the future.
I would love that.
All right, that was our interview with Chris Cottrell from Bedrock. I hope everybody learned a lot about old vines and Bedrock in general. Go find their wines. They're amazing, and if you can, make it to their tasting room. An awesome place to taste. But for now, that is our episode for this week. We'll be back with 5 questions this Friday and a full episode next week. Cheers.